Clemson, Florida State to the SEC. Now let's bring some reality back to the situation and some of the financial figures that we were discussing just a few minutes ago. So enlighten some folks based on not just the buyout to get out of the ACC, but everything that's involved.
Yeah, you know, the ACC's got this grant of rights. And let me start off by saying I am no lawyer. I am not an expert in contract law. So, but from my understanding, the way I read this thing and the way some other people that cover this team read this thing, there's a $52 million buyout just to get out of, or exit fee just to get out of the ACC. But with the grant of rights, if a team was to leave the ACC, that team forfeits their television revenue for the remainder of that television contract. And the ACC's television contract runs through 2036. So that's 15 years of television money they would have to forfeit. You combine that with the $50 million exit fee, and if they left today, that gets up to over $500 million very quickly. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. That's what they pay lawyers for, to work those things out. You know, if it ever came to that, ESPN owns both television contracts. I imagine if they wanted to get it done, they could find a way to get it done. But I just don't think there's not much teeth to this rumor right now. I mean, I think 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about something very different in college football. I don't think with the NCAA being stripped of so much power, they don't even have any real power over Power 5 football any longer, especially after the most recent Supreme Court decision. I think we're heading to where we see the top 40, 50, 60 teams all branch off, do their own thing. And I think it's going to be all under the same umbrella, where you want to call it the SEC, the Big Ten, call it whatever you want to, or the power of college football. And, you know, and you branch, kind of like the NFL does, one big league branched off into divisions, pods, whatever you want to call them, top 40, 50, 60 teams all playing under the same, you know, scope, however you want to frame that. But I think that's where we're heading. And I don't think any of the big football programs are going to be left out. But if you look at it from another perspective, if you're just looking at it from conference realignment perspective, the ACC is in trouble here. They are bound to a terrible, terrible deal they signed just recently when Notre Dame came on board partially, that got the ACC network up and running. And it is signed through 2036 that the schools get $30 million or whatever it is a year in television payouts. And SEC schools and Big Ten schools are already getting close to double that. Their television contracts are fixing to be renewed. The numbers being tossed around in this new SEC deal will, you know, triple, maybe even triple what the gap we're already seeing between Clemson and those SEC teams. And if the landscape were to stay this way and we stick with 4 or 5 conferences, and these conferences all do this, and the ACC stands pat and does nothing and is stuck under this contract for the next 15 years, I don't see how they survive. Not as a Power 5 conference. I mean, how does Clemson or Florida State or North Carolina keep up with the Alabamas and LSUs and Georgias when they're bringing in a third of the money in revenue? I mean, that's 3 times more money those teams can spend on coaches, on their recruiting budgets, whatever you want to call it. And Dabo Swinney was just talking last week how, you know, Clemson's done an excellent job at keeping up in the arms race despite the revenue gap. And it's a substantial revenue gap already. But he was just talking last week or the week before last, you know, that he talked to the media up in Clemson, and he was talking about some of the little things that need done that haven't been done yet. And one of the examples he gave was the indoor facility, how it's been in need of an upgrade for a long time. It hasn't been touched since it opened, I think, in 2012. That they haven't even that it's badly in need of just things like extra storage space, and they haven't been able to do that yet. And it's those kind of things right now that we're seeing with the financial discrepancies between the leagues. But under these new deals, and if the ACC can't do something, I mean, we're going to start seeing where these other programs are adding on the stadiums and building new facilities, and Clemson's kind of stuck where they are.
Yeah, the last figures I saw, and this all comes to light when expansion talk starts, and of course with the Texas-Oklahoma move. But for years and years and years, this is something that certain people look at, but I think most college football fans don't realize that I saw somewhere in the $65 to $68 million range for each SEC and Big Ten school. So they're way out ahead of everybody else. Then you've got the ACC around $35 million, I believe, per school in the TV payout.
I think Clemson got $32 million last year. I might be wrong about that.
Like
it's
that.
32, or maybe it was 36. I can't remember.
Something like that.
But yeah, I mean,
in the low to mid 30s, it's about half, maybe slightly more than half. And then the Big 12 and the Pac 12 are down there. The Pac 12 might be at like 28 or 29 million. I know there was somebody, and it would have been the Pac 12 in the high 20s. So you're talking about, I don't think people, if you put this in perspective, Illinois or Rutgers is bringing in twice as much money in TV revenue as Clemson is, or Florida State. That just seems ridiculous.
I mean, I've seen so many Clemson fans over the last week that they're not worried at all about this. They don't care if the ACC expands or does anything. They just know that Clemson can survive no matter what. And I just don't think that's being very realistic. That's not looking at the facts of the situation. I mean, it's just, I mean, Clemson could probably survive. And I'm just looking at this from a Clemson standpoint because that's who I cover. That's who I'm most familiar with. But it's not just Clemson. It's all the ACC teams. I mean, Clemson could probably offset some of that for the short-term foreseeable future. But 10 years from now, 15 years from now, it's just not feasible long-term. I've said it a dozen times in the last week. If the ACC stands pat, can't add a Notre Dame or somebody, and it can't be a West Virginia because that's not going to do it. That's not going to move the needle enough. You can't just add West Virginia and expect that to be enough, because it's not going to be. That's a pipe dream if people think so, and that's not a knock on West Virginia. That's just the reality of the situation. They're not going to bring that kind of revenue in by themselves. It's going to have to be a Notre Dame or a Penn State, which is another pipe dream. That's not happening. But golly, I don't forgot what I was saying now. But anyways, it's just not feasible long term, and there's just I know I said it a dozen times in the last week. If the ACC stands pat, they're going the way of Big East football.
Well, yeah, because you're looking at a situation where if you're going to keep geography together to a certain extent, and I think it will, my suggestion for the ACC is obviously to go hardline at Notre Dame. And then I think UCF might be the school to bring in geographically, money-wise, alumni base, big school. It's in Orlando, Disney, the whole thing. I think you go UCF and Notre Dame would be my targets.
If you could get Notre Dame, UCF be fine as a second team, as long as they're not the only team, because they're not going to do it by themselves, just like West Virginia wouldn't do it. But I mean, you got to have a Notre Dame, and I just don't know how much of reality that is right now. I mean, maybe later on down the line, once things start shifting more. But I mean, Notre Dame made far more money in the ACC last year than they do as an independent, and they still don't have. I mean, if making that much more money is not going to bring them in, I don't know what will.
So I can see this going one of two ways, even though there's probably about 8 different ways it could go. What you're talking about is, the top 40 or 50 teams get together and just rework the whole deal, and it becomes an NFL with some kind of geographic divisions. I would think that would be the way to go to a certain extent, although to keep them balanced, you'd probably have to kind of shift some southern teams to northern divisions or something to keep there's only so many Ohio States and Notre Dames to balance out all that talent in the South. So either that, or you see the Big Ten countering the SEC by swallowing up the Pac-12, or they have some kind of merger. And if they do, then the ACC is really in trouble if those two get together and form some kind of super league against the SEC.
I could see it going that way too. Maybe 2 leagues surviving, the Big Ten merging with, like you said, the Pac-10 or the ACC or whoever, and staving off this thing as long as possible and competing with the SEC. I can see it going that route. I just think in the end, when all the dust settles, it might be 2 decades from now, who knows? But I just think in the end, they'll all be sharing a piece of the same pie somehow. But I mean, these conferences are going to do everything they can to fight it off as long as they can. There's no doubt about that. Survival of the fittest right now.
Well, the Big Ten, it's almost remarkable, has been able to keep up with the SEC. And I'm not talking about on the field. I'm talking about all the things you're talking about, TV ratings, money, eyeballs, attendance, all that stuff. But the population's moving south and moving west. So I would think if the Big Ten and the ACC got together and said, look we've got the money, we got the muscle, we've got outside of Clemson, probably maybe the 3 biggest brands. But you've got things going your way. You got recruiting. Let's get together on this.
I could definitely see that as one possibility. You know, I think there's benefits to both sides. Honestly, you know, I mean, it would definitely bring in. It'd definitely be worth, you know, whoever buys the television contract, Fox or whoever, because I think in the Big Ten with Fox right now, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, whoever.
They're also with ESPN, but they're major. Yeah,
it would definitely be worth a lot more money than what the Big Ten's getting now. No doubt about it. I mean, I know teams like Florida State and Miami have been bad in recent years, and Miami's kind of turning it around now. But those are still 2 big brands. They still draw eyeballs. They put butts in the seats. Well, generally speaking, because
maybe not in Miami all the time.
Hasn't been great in Tallahassee or Miami lately, but
well, Tallahassee too, yeah.
They draw eyeballs.
Yep.
Still, they're still big, strong brands, and I think, you know, teams like Virginia Tech, North Carolina State, and obviously North Carolina, especially if you're considering basketball too, you know, they all bring their own unique skill sets or whatever to the table, however you want to describe it. But you know, it's really about those. And the ACC is really Clemson, Florida State, maybe Miami, Virginia Tech, and it's really probably Clemson and Florida State right now. But I think there would definitely be positives to both sides. I mean, the ACC's got to do something. I definitely do not envy Jim Phillips at all. You know, he comes into this new job and this is what he's faced with after his predecessor being a guy that was far more reactive than he was proactive for so long. And being reactive is one of the big reasons why the ACC is one of the bottom Power 5 conferences right now. I mean, they can't be reactive anymore. It's time to be proactive.
And who knows what the response would have been out of Notre Dame last year. But I sat here during that pandemic time when Notre Dame's schedule was completely obliterated because nobody in the Big Ten and the Pac-12 was playing at that point, and the ACC bailed them out and played Mr. Nice Guy. We're going to bail you out, appease you. But I would have played it more hard line to say, yeah, we want you to play football. Let's play football for the next 20 years. Sign a 20-year contract, and we'll bail you out for this year. And again, all the other sports are playing.
I got a different version of that story, you know, and I don't know if I don't know how much, and it comes from somebody I trust who's who you know, who's been very reliable in the past, and he told me that, according to what he says, Notre Dame's one of the biggest reasons the ACC stayed to track and play football last year. You know, they were leaning towards following the Big Ten's lead, and Clemson didn't want to do that, and a couple other schools didn't want to do that. But, you know, Clemson's the big football power right now, and Notre Dame, you know, came to them, and they joined with Clemson behind the scenes to push for the season, and that's really what got that ball rolling. But, you know, like you talking about forcing their hand, I don't know. I know a lot of people feel that same way. You know, I know a lot of people say, hey, should have told them, get in, get out. You know, if you don't get in, you're not playing this year. I'm not so sure they wouldn't have just skipped the season, man. To me, that's how they come off up there. You know, that's how prideful they are about that independence. I don't know if forcing their hand would have worked. I mean, like I said earlier, they already wasn't. I can't even remember the specifics now, but they made substantially more money last year playing in the ACC than they do as an independent. And that's not it. And usually money talks, and that's not even enough right now. So, I mean, Heck, I just saw yesterday where their first game is going to be on the Peacock Network exclusively. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some Notre Dame fans unhappy about that. But I think, I think that's where we're heading. Streaming's in the future, and that's going to be a big part of these new television contracts.
There you go. It's a changing world. There's no doubt about that. In an off season where we already thought it was the biggest newsworthy off season with NIL and a 12-team college football playoff proposal and transfer portal humming every day, boom, we get slammed with Texas, Oklahoma to the SEC and all the rumors that are making their way after that.